That's a very interesting question because, in fact, that's one of the characteristics of the electric and magnetic fields from transmission lines and from underground lines in particular, is that the fields drop off dramatically with distance. And so, therefore, if you want to know where the location of the highest field is, then that would be essentially directly over any kind of underground transmission lines. Or if you're on let's say, a utility right of way where there are overhead lines, then the highest fields are directly under those lines. The fields are lower than the guidance standard that has been developed internationally for protection of public health. And so we're not going to be anywhere close to that number. And in fact, because these fields drop off so dramatically with distance, that if you're in a, let's say, random location in the parking lot, it's probably true that you can't even detect the presence of the underground lines. You would have to move over and essentially be standing on top of the underground route if you were to try to use a measuring instrument to determine what the fields were. In our homes, we use the same type of electricity for our appliances, for our heating, and for fans and so forth. And everywhere you use 60 cycle electricity, you're going to have these 60 cycle magnetic fields. And it's something that we've used for a long time. Anyway, we have for over 100 years have had 60 cycle electric power. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts has many utility right-of-ways that carry this power back and forth. And the places where the electric and magnetic fields exist are, in those right-of-ways, but also in our homes.
Let's say under the beach location at, the Worcester Ave location that we looked at, approximately 8 meters at least below the beach. So the thermal radiation similar to the magnetic field dissipates with distance. I wouldn't expect a significant difference in temperature above those locations.
If you're looking at a location where there's no utility structure of any kind, then yes, it will be more than the nothing that was there before. But I think if you were to compare it, for example, to the magnetic fields that you get, particularly from motorized appliances, because if you think about it, the energy in a motor, I mean, the way that the motor turns is essentially because magnetic fields repel each other, and that causes the rotor to turn relative to the stator. And those magnetic fields are quite strong. And so if you were in a house that was typically using electricity, I don't think you would see any effect from these, even if they were quite nearby. And so again, there are guidelines that say that those pacemakers, can be affected by very high fields, but not of the kinds of the size fields that we're talking about here. You have to remember that these are not fields that radiate. These are fields that are so low in frequency, 60 cycles per second, that they're far different from what you might think of as your cell phone emitting or a television or radio antenna emitting. The issue of what biological or health effects of power line magnetic fields could cause have been very thoroughly addressed. I mean, I think that there were a lot of studies that were begun in the late 70s and the early 80s. There was a whole program that was funded by the Congress to look for potential effects. The bottom line of all of those was that they really didn't find any potential effects. And I think I can provide links to various health authorities like the World Health Organization, Health Canada, the Health Authority of the UK, and so forth, where they have looked at all of the literature and said, well, we don't really see that there are any effects that are below the level that has been determined by the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. A lot of the research that started back in the early 80s and so forth was in fact stimulated by the idea that somebody had that, perhaps they could, perhaps these fields could be linked to some increase in cancer. However, those early studies then triggered a lot of subsequent research, and then that's why I'm encouraging people to look, not at the internet generally, but really look at kind of legitimate public health sites, such as the World Health Organization or ICNIRP or Public Health England and so forth, because those have been reviewed time and time again by authorities and scientists who know how those studies are carried out. And that's how the present standard was derived. And I think that it's a standard that is protective. And I think that, I feel confident that the kind of concern that people are expressing is not going to be warranted. And I think part of the reason that I mentioned earlier was that we've been using this type of electric power for, many, many decades. And the public health statistics that have followed the United States population and populations around the world have not shown any correlation with an increasing risk of a disease that correlates with our increasing use of electricity. And I would just reference people to things like the World Health Organization analysis. I mean, they have essentially looked at that literature not only for cancer, but for other kinds of potential health effects that people may be concerned about, such as nervous system effects and so on. And again, they've not found anything consistent that would suggest that it's a risk factor for increasing nervous system diseases.
Because this is really low frequency variation, 60 cycles. Those kinds of EMF rays that they call ionizing radiation are the things that actually can cause thermal heating, can cause necessarily organic chemicals to change. These frequencies of 60 cycles per second have never been shown to actually do any kind of damage to our chemistry or cell structures. It's just, when you overgeneralize, electromagnetic fields are very different at different frequencies. I mean, and take a look at microwaves. A microwave oven can heat up and cook food, and it can even break down the organic structures. But those frequencies are tens of thousands of times higher than the 60 cycles that power our houses and all of our electrical devices. So people are overgeneralizing when they think that electromagnetic fields are dangerous. They exist, but they're very different characteristics at different frequencies.
And first of all, I'd like to very much endorse what Mr. Patterson just said about the difference between ionizing and non-ionizing radiation. But when you're down at these very low frequencies, that's one of the issues that all of these scientific organizations have looked at, is to see whether or not there is a mechanism by which these kinds of electric and magnetic fields can cause damage in biological tissues. And the answer is they haven't found anything. A lot of scientists have tried very hard to do it. And remember that we all live in a electromagnetic environment. There are electric fields from the clouds overhead that pass us by. And then there's, of course, the magnetic field of the Earth that always points to the north. And those are steady, but we move around in them. So they are actually kind of time varying electric and magnetic fields that affect us. But they're, again, very low frequency. And so I think that's one of the key ingredients here that are important.